O'clock. I presume that people might still be joining, but I suppose that we can start regardless. And we're going to get to the contents only in a few minutes anyways. But thank you, first of all, to everyone for joining. Really, really great to have so many registrations for this webinar and of such diverse backgrounds. Really, yeah, like really great to have you. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar together today with a fantastic group of guest speakers who have been working with SAI Platform and the Regenerating Together team very closely for quite some time. But before I kick us off, and before we get going, I'd like to remind us all or familiarize us all with SAI Platform's antitrust caution statement, which requires that all topics and contents discussed during this session must comply with competition laws. Essentially, we must avoid sharing or discussing any commercially sensitive information, including pricing, costs, marketing strategies, trading terms, etc., whether during this session or in private conversations. And if you're ever unsure whether something is appropriate that is being discussed, please just raise it with us as the facilitators and we'll pause the discussion. Yeah, thank you. Also, just one quick slide. In terms of housekeeping, please keep your lines muted when you post any questions you may have to the chat. Please include your name and organization. We'll do our best to answer during this call, and yeah, otherwise we're going to follow up. Also, by attending this webinar, you might have seen it, and you acknowledge that it is being recorded, and that will share the slides and the webinar recording, as well as additional resources following today's session. Yeah. Moving us on to the agenda. So we've got a very busy but very exciting agenda for the next 55 or so minutes, which you can see here on the right-hand side, and which I'll introduce again properly on the next slide together with the speakers of today's session. And we're going to get right to it. And we're going to start with Pascal Chapeau from Nestlé, who we have with us today, and who is going to speak about the momentum from the industry around driving regenerative agriculture at scale. Thank you for being with us today, Pascal. After that, then we'll throw the hot potato back to my wonderful colleague, Julia De Candido, part of the Regenerating Together team here at SAI Platform, who will continue today's webinar by discussing our efforts around uniting behind a global framework for regenerative agriculture. Then after that, we'll pass the word to Joe Madlew from the National Institute of Agricultural Botany, NIAB in the UK, who will highlight their work around the scientific underpinnings of regenerative agriculture. And after which Alejandra Sarmiento Soler from OFI will speak about the relevance of farmer-centric approaches in implementing regenerative agriculture. And then, finally, we have our former Regenerating Together director and now Carlsberg ally, Dom Clauser, with us today to wrap up our little webinar narrative around underlining the flexibility and adaptability needed in effectively engaging the whole value chain in driving the implementation of regenerative agriculture. As a little background from our side, we've also prepared some context setting, just a couple of slides to kick us off. And many, or at least some of you may have previously seen this slide recapping that the Regenerating Together program really started as a SAI Platform member-led initiative based on the fact that historically, there has been no or little alignment on the understanding of what regenerative agriculture actually is, how it fits into complex value chains, but at the same time also connects with farmers, how to make valid claims about regen ag while avoiding greenwashing, and how to incentivize and drive its uptake. All of this has historically meant limited on-the-ground action when it comes to a regenerative agriculture. So the journey that we have engaged in was really driven by multiple and varied stakeholders, including SAI Platform's membership, farmers, a Farmer and Science Advisory Board, as well as other external organizations and bodies, including academia and research, tech and MRV companies, and others. And all of this was really done with the intention to develop an approach, the Regenerating Together framework, that A, offers a shared definition for regenerative agriculture between different stakeholders and their individual perspectives, but that is also at the same time flexible and context specific, yet outcome driven. And then that is also, that integrates a systematic approach for monitoring, reporting, and verification in order to allow for third-party verified claims based on the implementation of regenerative agriculture in value chains. Now, before I'll pass on the word to Pascal, who will speak about the momentum from the industry for driving regenerative agriculture, we have prepared one short question for you using Slido. So if you would all be so kind and either use your phone and scan the QR code on the slide here, or head to slido.com and enter the code on the screen, we'd like to know from you who we have in the audience today. Yeah, if you would all like to head over there. Are you a farmer from a food and beverage company, from a finance and insurance company or bank, from a tech or MRV company, from academia and research, from a non-governmental or non-profit organization, from a governmental or intergovernmental organization, from a verification body, or from agricultural advisory services, or from any other background? And I suggest we take about 30 seconds or so to let people answer. And we can already see quite a few joining. 60 people are in the Slido poll. I will take some time so I can see, like, at the top, really, like, the food and beverage sector is quite prominently represented here today, but also a fair few participants from NGOs, NPOs, agricultural advisory services, from academia and research. Yeah, so yeah. Quite a varied audience, and people are still jumping in. And maybe we take another 10, 15 seconds. But yeah, really, really great. Thank you very much. It's really fantastic to see so many varied backgrounds in this webinar today. That is really great. But in the interest of time, I suggest that I move us on to the next slide. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the word to Pascal, who is joining me today in kicking off this webinar by highlighting the momentum from the industry in driving regenerative agriculture at scale. Pascal, thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is yours. I'll hand over.
Thank you, Bastien, and thank you for this opportunity and the opportunity giving me these opening words. So I'm Pascal Chapeau. I'm heading agriculture at Nestlé, and as such, leading this regenerative agriculture initiative that we launched 5 years ago almost now. So I think speaking about regenerative agriculture. Today there is no more questions or doubts about the fact that this is the right thing to do, bringing more agroecological principles and changing the way we farm. There are resources that we need to restore. I think that the good thing is that today there is no more doubts or question marks about that, and I think also. All of us, each time we travel and we meet farmers, we see and we hear about the impact of climate change. Be it droughts, be it too much water, rainfalls, be it heat waves. So in Europe, we had something recently. Or be it also just a move of the rainy season, which is maybe something which is more difficult to assess, but which we see extremely impacting in tree productions, for instance, talking coffee, for instance. This is something I'm seeing in many locations. So no more doubts. We need to drive it, and we have embarked the journey. So we as Nestlé, but also we as industry, because I see a lot of other companies who are quite well advanced on the journey. Many members of SAI platforms, by the way. So we have all started, but over the last years with I would say different frameworks or different definitions, but not that different. So, we were now, then as a consequence, extremely welcoming the common framework. There was really a need for an alignment on the understanding, on what to drive, how to assess it. And with the regenerative together framework, now we have it. We have something. And to me, it's really a great move, a great step forward. A big thank you to everybody involved and who contributed to that. There was a need. Now there is something. It's to me simple enough. It's a good balance between simplicity and to make it applicable, but also to make it meaningful, content proof, to have relevant content and relevant, meaningful proof points. Yeah, so it's a good one. I have to say also that it's been backed up by a lot of, very serious institutions, universities, experts around the world. So, I could relate to many, but I think it wouldn't make a lot of sense here and for the sake of time. But I think it's a good balance today. So we strongly encourage, to move towards that framework, use it, play with it. It's an aligned approach. It's probably not perfect, but for sure we can improve it, and we can improve it all together. We are testing it on top of what we are doing now. This year we want to play with it, to test it, and see how we can incorporate that into our approach and continue what we have been driving, and continue to see how that can connect and correlate to the proof points that we are seeing. And I want to stress that I'm very happy because after a few years, we see very encouraging signs and evidences that there is a way to tick all the boxes, to impact environment, to reduce carbon footprint, to improve soil health, to improve soil structure, to improve water usage as well, and at the same time improve productivity, farmer income, and so on. We have very encouraging proof points. Doesn't mean that everything is always rosy, but we see very encouraging proof points. So we really keep full speed towards this direction. Last year, we reported 21%, of the volume corresponding 21% of the volume we source corresponding to farmers adopting these regenerative practices. So we keep on, we keep up, and I can only encourage everyone to appropriate, to make that framework, yours. It's important to note that it's a framework. I think this is important. There is no cooking recipe in agriculture, as you all know, and it's important not to kill the creativity. So we need a good balance between alignment and creativity. I'm sure we have something. It's probably improvable. So let's embark and test and try and learn and provide feedback. And then all together, I think we can make it better and better over time and over years. And yeah, so in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to tell to you today. And I will not take much more of that time, precious time, because there are very, very good things coming now. So thank you, and yeah, looking forward. Over to you, Bastien.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Pascal. It's been really great to hear from you. And yeah, some powerful messages, and also really great to hear about Nestlé's commitments in regards to regenerative agriculture. Yeah, I'm going to take us back to a shared screen. Just Julia, for you to confirm maybe that everyone can see the screen again.
You can.
Great, fantastic. Okay. Yeah, thanks very much again, Pascal. Now I'm throwing the hot potato to Julia, who will speak about SAI Platform's efforts in uniting the sector in a global framework for regenerative agriculture for the next few minutes. Julia, looking forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's really encouraging to see such a big turnout and also just to see the great interest for regenerative agriculture. So thank you from my side as well for joining our webinar on this very beautiful day. Certainly a great day for playing mini golf. But as Bastien mentioned, I now have the pleasure of taking us deeper into the purpose, the scope, and the structure of our Regenerating Together framework, and also to celebrate the release of our very first peer-reviewed methods paper. The paper was aimed to transparently share the thinking and the methodology behind our framework. And we really want it to be used to engage with the broader network of stakeholders, including all of you here today, to help advance and to continually refine our approach to regenerative agriculture. So the paper is open access and it can be downloaded on the Frontiers website. And you can find the link through SAI Platform social media channels. And just a quick shout out and a big thank you to all of the co-authors, our members, and external stakeholders for helping us produce it. In essence, our outcome-based framework builds on a review of existing frameworks, initiatives, and standards, and it also incorporates several rounds of consultations, field testings, pilots, and inputs from members, from farmers, and from our Farmer and Science Advisory Board. It is important to mention, as Pascal also said, it's not a strict standard as such, but it instead defines boundaries within which farms and farm groups can operate within. So it offers a flexible approach to implementing regenerative agriculture, and it's based on a universal set of outcomes. So we developed the Regenerating Together framework with several key purposes in mind. And at its core, it's intended to be a practical framework that really supports farmers, advisors, and value chain actors in working together towards regenerative agriculture. And it is designed to be used globally and for any land-based farming system. So we see the framework being used by farmers, by farm advisors, industry partners, academia, and the public sector in general to firstly create a shared expectation and a common understanding of what regenerative agriculture is across the entire value chain and the broader landscape. So our goal is really to create a shared vision of what regenerative agriculture can achieve and the outcomes that we can expect. It provides the boundaries to make independently verified claims and statements around sustainable sourcing efforts. And the aim of this is to safeguard the concept of regenerative agriculture and also to reduce the risk of greenwashing. We also hope that through this framework, we're able to minimize duplication and administrative efforts in data collection and reporting. So we really want to shift the focus of collecting data simply for the sake of data reporting to identifying the support and the resources needed to really enable on-the-ground action. And by aligning with and also complementing existing regenerative agriculture initiatives, standards, and frameworks, we really hope to drive greater coherence and efficiencies across the landscape. Thirdly, we want to have this framework to enable transparent dialogue and collaboration between value chain actors. So we strongly believe that farmers and farm advisors must have a voice in shaping their regenerative agriculture journey. And by working together and agreeing on meaningful goals, we believe the risk of imposing arbitrary outcomes and indicators on farmers is minimized. And lastly, our goal is that this framework helps to really advance regenerative agriculture by supporting farms and farm groups through their regenerative agriculture journey by providing guidance, resources to select relevant outcomes, practices, and ways to meaningfully monitor progress against these in a standardized way. So with the purpose in mind, here's our common understanding of regenerative agriculture. For us, it is an outcome-based approach to farming. It focuses on protecting and improving soil health, biodiversity, climate, and water resources, and all of this, of course, while supporting farmer livelihoods. And now a few words to the design principles of our framework. So first, because the framework is intended for a global application, we designed it to be quite flexible, so it can be really adapted to the specific local context in ways that are both practical and meaningful. Second, it is outcome-based. So this means that farmers and farm groups have the autonomy to really choose the practices that are most relevant to them, rather than following a rigid one-size-fits-all approach. And third, at the heart of agriculture are farmers themselves. And that's why our framework places strong emphasis on farmer engagement and support throughout the entire process. And with these principles in mind, which you will also see come to life from the examples that our guest speakers will share in a few moments, we've developed a 4-step implementation approach that I will now walk you through. So as you may know, and as I've already mentioned a few times, agriculture is inherently context-specific, that's shaped by a range of factors such as climate, soil types, and market access. And the first step of the framework, the context analysis, supports farms in developing a better understanding of their environmental context. So the 12 material criteria, which span across the 4 environmental impact areas, and that's what you can see on the right-hand side of your screen here, they help identify those inherent environmental risks that are specific to each farm or production system. So each of these criterions is assessed by a scoring scale from 1 to 3, guided by a questionnaire. And it has deliberately been designed to be subjective because we hope that it will stimulate good agronomic thinking and discussions between farmers and their trusted advisors. The context analysis is essential as it lays the groundwork really for building shared understanding and trust amongst participating stakeholders, and it sets that foundation for co-creating locally appropriate improvement plans. So regenerative agriculture aims to deliver a broad range of outcomes, but the relevance and the priority of these outcomes can vary significantly, again, because of the context. So building on the insights gathered through the context analysis, this step really involves selecting and prioritizing outcomes that are most meaningful and applicable to the farming system. Currently, the framework focuses on the environmental outcomes, which you can see depicted on the right-hand side of your screen. We are working with Rockefeller, 60 decibels, and others to develop and test a set of livelihoods outcomes and indicators to integrate into our framework next year. So building on the prioritized outcomes, the third step of the framework really focuses on identifying and selecting locally relevant on-farm actions. So again, rather than being prescriptive and having a fixed set of practices, the framework is designed to empower farmers and their trusted advisors to choose actions that are most likely to improve performance against the prioritized outcomes. And there is a growing body of evidence linking specific practices to regenerative agriculture outcomes, which we will hear more about in a few minutes from Joe. And as this evidence base expands through both scientific research and farm data, the connections between practices and outcomes will continue to refine and be strengthened. So the practice table you can now see on your screen serves as a starting point. It is a tool to help identify and suggest potential actions. However, any of the proposed practices should always be validated for their relevance and effectiveness in the local context before you implement them. And regenerative agriculture is all about continuous improvement. So we see ongoing evaluation of progress towards the outcomes as crucial to really monitor the long-term impact of regenerative agriculture, and also just to ensure that the intended environmental and socioeconomic benefits are actually being realized over time. So continuous improvement plans are a core part of the Regenerating Together framework. This plan describes how improvement against the prioritized outcomes will be achieved, how the practices will be implemented, and how progress will be monitored over time. And to track progress against the outcomes, our framework offers a menu of indicators that farms and farm groups can select from. And this was because of the feedback we received from members and farmers who said that defining one metric per outcome was too limiting and not inclusive enough. So for each of the outcome indicators we include in our framework, we also provide guidance on data collection and reporting, which should support farms and farm groups when they track their progress. So the Regenerating Together performance levels were developed to recognize and also to reward farms at the various stages of their regenerative agriculture journey. And these levels not only acknowledge the farm's progress, but they also serve as a foundation for incentive mechanisms and market access opportunities. Currently, our framework defines 4 performance levels that you see. We have onboarding, engaging, advancing, and leading. And the requirements to meet these different levels are described in more detail in the normative documents. These essentially reflect the level of farmer engagement and their progress towards the regenerative outcomes. And we will be refining and tightening the requirements of these levels as the framework continues to evolve. But this tiered approach enables a more inclusive and a scalable transition because it really meets farmers where they are while also supporting that notion of continuous improvement. So verified claims are a cornerstone of most incentive programs that aim to promote sustainable agriculture. And to support this, we have developed an assurance protocol that will be available as of 2026. And it will enable farms or farm groups to make verified regenerating together claims in the marketplace following a successful third-party verification by an approved verification body. The protocol follows a process-based verification approach. It is designed to be both scalable as well as credible, and it evaluates whether the framework has been implemented in line with the requirements outlined, and it uses a hybrid approach of both desk-based and on-farm audits. It is important to note that this verification supports supply chain claims related to area or volume, but it is not able to support any impact claims. So any of those types of claims would need to be developed in alignment with specific baselines and additional methodologies that account for the local conditions and indicators. But I do realize that that was quite a lot of information to take in all at once. So I also just wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the key resources that you can download to help you familiarize yourself with, or even help us contribute to the continual refinement of our framework. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll find the framework narrative and the methods paper, which provide a comprehensive overview of the framework's design and the purpose. And then on the right-hand side, there's a range of normative and guidance documents that are intended to support the implementation of our framework. Currently, most of these are only available to SAI platform members only. They will be made public in 2026 after our extensive pilot phase. But just a quick round, so moving clockwise, we have a framework implementation guide. This is a step-by-step instruction manual that helps you implement the framework, and it also outlines the minimum requirements for third-party verification. We then have an outcome quantification guide, and this offers examples of tools, of models, and approaches for monitoring the outcomes and indicators we include in our framework. We then have the assurance protocol, which is designed for verification bodies conducting audits. We are then also developing a benchmarking protocol that can be used to compare the alignment of existing frameworks with our generating together framework in order to minimize duplication. We have an assessment tool that is available both as a web application as well as an Excel spreadsheet, and this supports the implementation of the framework. And then finally, the transition support guide, which provides inspiration, guidance, as well as case studies for any of you that want to start regenerative agriculture initiatives that are aligned with our framework. So as mentioned, we are committed to strengthening these resources to really ensure that they are fit for purpose, they are scientifically robust, and they are practical. And if you are interested in testing or helping us shape these resources further, please don't hesitate to reach out, or if you have any questions as well. But with that, thank you so much for listening, and I'll pass the word back to you, Bastian.
Yeah, thank you so much for this update, Julia. And for, I guess, providing a technical snapshot of the Regenerating Together framework. And moving on now with the tight schedule, I now have the pleasure to hand over the word to Joe from NIAB, who is with us today and who will highlight their work around regenerative agriculture and its scientific foundation. Yeah, as I said, really great to have you, Joe, and excited to hear from you for the next few minutes. Looking forward.
Cheers, Bastian, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Joe. I'm a research scientist at NIAB. So if anybody's not aware of NIAB, we're an independent agricultural and horticultural research institution based in the UK. And the guys from SAI Platform approached us sort of last autumn, winter time to collaborate together on a piece of work, really to do some evidence review, to build on stuff that they'd already been doing, to underlie some of the stuff that Julia's just been talking about. So I don't know if you can flick onto my first slide there, Bastian, and the next one. Thank you. So there were a couple of aims to the project. I put the main aim in bold and a sort of a secondary aim just underneath that, not in bold. And the main aim was to do exactly what we've just been talking about, really. We've got that list of practices, we've got that list of outcomes. And the idea of the project was to draw together those two things to understand if there was good evidence to link those things together, which sounds simple in theory, but actually in practice, that's a real challenge, especially when we're thinking about these like global level supply chains with lots of different farming systems and environments and stuff in. We then had a secondary aim, which was then around thinking about if we could put some numbers to those things. So if we use the example in the bottom right there, I've got one practice there, which is minimize soil disturbance. And then I've got one outcome on the other side, improving soil structure and fertility. So for our first aim, hopefully that's quite logical. You know, we should be able to find some evidence to link those two things together and to really understand the robustness of that evidence. For that second aim, that sort of secondary aim number 2 that I've got there, we're then really starting to think about, can we put some numbers to that? So if I reduce for example here, minimize my soil disturbance by 30%, does that give me an appreciable outcome in one of those outcome metrics? Or does it need to be 90% or 80%? You know, the ask was to understand whether there was data behind and evidence available to sort of support any of that thinking. So the approach we took was guided a little bit by science, and also a little bit by the really tight time frame that we had to turn this around. So we only had a few weeks to turn this around. So we chose a rapid evidence assessment as our way of doing this. And we only considered existing review documents, so systematic review documents, descriptive reviews, and existing meta-analyses. And we used quite a flexible approach in there. So, you know, the full method's available in the report if anybody's super interested, but we allowed things like snowballing and stuff so that we could really pick up on some of the areas of interest and follow those through and process as much information as quickly as possible and generate that evidence to a robust standard. What that creates is a huge repository of information. You know, it generates thousands of documents as we create these search strings of practices and outcomes and run them through all the online repositories of information that are out there. And what we created for SAI platform was this database. So for every practice, you have this page full of information for all the outcomes that links all of the information that we found that's out there and available. And so that sort of, you know, forms hopefully a really, really good sort of baseline for decision making and for developing the framework. However, that's not a particularly exciting thing to look at in a 10-minute presentation. So if you flick to the next slide, Bastian, I thought I'd just draw out one of the tables that we put in the report where we attempted to sort of visualize some of that in a little bit less detail. So what you've got on the screen is you've got the practices down the left-hand side. So those are the titles for all the things that SAI platform is asking people to do. And obviously within those, for all different types of farming systems, you've got, you know, many, many different explanations. We've got a glossary that takes all those sub-practices into consideration. And then across the top, you've got all the outcomes from SAI platforms. Those are the things that Julie was just talking about. And then you'll see for every outcome, you've got two columns. You've got F-STRUR and EVI-STRUR. F-STRUR is effect strength, is what it stands for. So that is how strong the effect of the practice on the left-hand side relates to the outcome that are running across the top. So where I've done cover cropping, how strongly does that impact against one of those outcomes? The second column that you've got for every one of those outcomes is EVI-STRUR, and that stands for evidence strength. So that is a judgment, and it's what sits behind it is a weighted average number of how much evidence there was and how good the evidence was to support that link. So you might find one piece of evidence that says, this is fantastic, this has got a really strong link with something, but actually, you know, just one piece of evidence might not be a great way to sort of make a robust decision and have a robust framework behind this. So hopefully that gives an idea as you look across those rows and columns of how the strength of evidence and how the effect evidence sort of sits. And it goes from 3 crosses right through to, in theory, 3 minuses, green to red, and where you've got the little squiggly line, that means there was a mixed evidence found there. And what you can see from the screen is that they are, you know, we found lots of links, which is fantastic. And that there was a really good, robust level of links for lots of those practices. But actually, I think one of my big takeaways is that there's a huge paucity in the evidence that's available. It really, really varied from some practices and some outcomes having really strong links and a really good evidence repository to especially some of those more specialized practices that only relate to a few of the outcomes, you know, very, very sort of few and far between bits of evidence. The other issue with the search as we went through it was that actually a lot of the search and the best evidence that's out there just relates to sort of broad acre arable systems. And obviously when we're working with something like SAI platform, we're relating this information to lots of different types of supply chains, lots of different types of crops. So what that means behind the scenes is actually the database that underlies the graphic that you can see on the screen is a little bit unbalanced. And that's just a reflection of how the data is and how the evidence is at the moment. And it's important to sort of highlight where those gaps are in the literature. The other, what I thought was quite interesting when we were running through this was that the translation to best practice is quite tricky because, and lots of the authors of those individual review documents highlighted this themselves, is that actually when all of those individual journal publications that make up those review documents are published, actually often best practice guidance isn't their guiding aim for what they're doing in producing those documents. So some of the metrics that they use to define the effect of the practices on the outcomes aren't actually very useful when we try to deploy this on farm. So that causes some issues when we're trying to think about those thresholds and putting numbers to some of those things. And I think the last thing to say is I think we created a little bit of bias. You'll see lots of green on the screen. because the way that we formed the search strings was taking the practices and the outcomes. Obviously, they've been chosen because those things are exactly what we want to achieve with regenerative agriculture. But I think it did create a little bit of sort of positive bias in that search. So if we flick on to the next one, Bastian. I thought, because I've only got a few minutes, I thought I'd just do my key takeaways rather than run through lots and lots of detail for all of those different practices. If anybody wants to, you can phone me or read the report, and I'll be more than happy to sort of walk that through with you. The key takeaways, the top three that are in bold relate to my main aim, and those ones just below relate to our secondary aim, that thresholding one. The first takeaway that I thought was really interesting was just doing this thought exercise was really useful. We did this backwards and forwards with the guys from SAI platform. And I think running through from generating really good evidence and even just deciding what made up some of those practices and what we were allowing into the search, all the way through the search document, and then running through into trying to create something that's useful for people to use. I think that iterative framework, there was lots of backwards and forwards between us and Julia and her colleagues to sort of understand exactly how best to do that. And I think that thought process was really, really good. My second key takeaway is that we created this practice evidence outcome, which was fantastic. That was our primary aim, and there was evidence out there that we managed to sort of correlate into something that was hopefully usable for the guys to sort of create the RTF framework on the top. But I think my three key words there are to build upon. This was never meant to be just a published piece of sort of evidence review work. This was meant to be the establishment of a framework that could then be developed and used over time. You know, the evidence in there needs to be reviewed and added to as it changes over time, and as we gain a better understanding of some of the evidence, especially for those systems that aren't brilliantly represented by the evidence that's available at the moment. And number three, through that process, I acknowledged all of those knowledge gaps and the evidence strength, which I think is really important. So hopefully when the guys are then creating all of these standards for the framework, we know where we're standing on some slightly more solid ground compared to where we're sort of lacking some of that evidence. The two that are in non-bold text at the bottom, as I said, just relate to that thresholding bit, that secondary and that aim that we had in terms of putting numbers to this. So the first bit went really well in terms of just creating some questions. So somebody could have a piece of paper or a PDF in their office and sort of tick off the things that they were doing. That was fairly easy to do. We could create some sort of nice subjective questions to understand where people were engaging with these. Where we came unstuck, as I've alluded to on the previous slide, was where we then tried to sort of put numbers to those thresholds, you know, that sort of 30% reduction in cultivation intensity versus 80%, what gives us a meaningful output across masses of different systems. And for a few, there were good evidence to do that, but actually for 99%, we didn't feel that there was strong evidence to be able to do that, and especially applying that across different systems and across different agricultural growing environments was a real challenge. And lastly, my last point is just my picture there, which is from a workshop that we ran earlier on in the year around regenerative agriculture with the University of Leeds and catchment sensitive farming in the UK. But my point of putting that in was our end recommendation was really, and hopefully it picks up on what Julia said and the speaker after me is going to say, is that iterative development with key stakeholders, I think, is the next way. As I said, it's not supposed to be a static framework. That wasn't the point of this piece of work. It was supposed to be establishing a way of working and then working with key stakeholders to understand how we apply that in the future. And that was all I was going to say, Bastian.
Thank you so much, Joe. That's amazing. Yeah, that's really great to see the work that you've been doing come to life in a 10-minute presentation. Really fantastic. Thanks for sharing with us this insightful information. Yeah, about the empirical evidence of how regenerative agriculture outcomes and practices link in with each other. Yeah, we're already moving on with our narrative. Alejandra from OFI will now highlight the necessity for farmer-centric approaches when implementing regenerative agriculture. Alejandra, I'm already handing the word to you. The floor is yours. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Bastian. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Absolutely. Here we go.
Yeah, thanks, Julia and Bastian, for inviting us to participate in this space and to share our experience in making regenerative agriculture pragmatic and putting farmers first. For the ones who don't know me, I'm Alejandra Sarmiento, the Regenerative Agriculture Program Manager at OFI, All and Food Ingredients. And together with my colleague Pete Van Asten, we lead the Regenerative Agriculture Strategy. And before we jump into the whole topic, please allow me to introduce shortly All and Food Ingredients. Go to the next slide, Bastian, please. For the ones who don't know. Yes, OFI, Oil and Food Ingredients, is a global supplier of ingredients. We focus on 5 product platforms, we call them. It is coffee, cacao, nuts, spices, and dairy. We are sourcing from around 2.4 million farmers in direct and indirect supply chains and are operating in 50 countries. We have our purpose is to be the change for good food and a healthy future, and are very proud of our presence in the ground. We have sustainability teams in many of those regions interacting directly with farming and with farmers and farming communities. Please go to the next slide. Last year, we launched our sustainability value proposition named Choices for Change, which covers 4 interconnected pillars, because we see change doesn't happen in silos, but it covers different dimensions. And these pillars is prosperous farmers, thriving communities, climate change, and regenerating the living world. All of it in a supply chain excellence foundation. And what you are seeing in the screen is the dedicated targets. So each of the pillars has its own targets, but the ones on the screen are the dedicated ones from the last pillar, regenerating the living world. And we are aiming, striving to reach 2 million hectares under regenerative agricultural practices, to become forest positive across our business, and to engage in 20 living landscape partnerships to regenerate nature. And probably many of you are already thinking, okay, yeah, what do you mean with regenerative agriculture? Which approach are you following? How are you measuring it? What are you doing in that space? And I hope I managed to answer that in the next slides. So Bastian, please go to the next slide. So what you are seeing, oh, there were some changes on the, good, no problem. What you're seeing here in this slide is a very simplified, high level overview of the supply chain. So on the left, we have for farmers, then we supply from them, and then we, on the right side, in the blue circle, it should say customers. We also have reporting commitments, and all these people in this chain have aspirations, have goals, does things, does interventions to have impact, to have outcomes, to have output. And the challenge we see is that we are not very well aligned on what does it mean. On the right side, we have our reporting, our customers, we ourselves, we really want clear, tidy set of indicators that allow us to evaluate, to align, and to report. And then when we move to the left side, we have this diversity and this beautiful mix of landscapes, soils, farmers, people, everything together. And this is very complex. It's like we have on the right side the Olympic Committee, which says we will win 10 gold medals in the next Olympic Games. And then on the left side, we have the athletes which need to train, need to eat, need to sleep, and need all this guidance and clear plans to be able to reach those goals. And this tension, what we experience every day when we work with regenerative agriculture. So from one side, the reporting customers, this organized, tidy list of indicators, and on the left side, this full complexity. And in this sense, the work of the SAI platform and Regenerating Together program has been incredible and helpful, because it has helped to keep us aligned, but has also provided us a framework or a harmonized process to tackle this complexity and to dive in and have these conversations with the farmers. Bastian, you went very fast, or I don't know what happened.
No, something jumped, but
It moved alone.
Yeah, I'm moving us back. Something jumped.
Yes. Well, yeah. So from that, just to say, yeah, the framework requires that we do our homework and go to the ground and still contextualize it. So you can go to the next slide. With that, we have an OFI or own approach very aligned with the SAI platform, which starts it's a farmer-centric approach with the farmers who decide which practices to implement. We will consider those regional practices when they provide positive impact on the different areas in soil health, water, biodiversity, and climate. And this impact can have different levels: minimize, restore, or enhance. And we are supporting farmers and evaluating what they are doing, their efforts or their training. We also need to have into account these outcomes. And for that, we have settled for 4 core outcomes: carbon footprint, water footprint, nitrogen use efficiency, and pesticide risk, that allow us to compare across the different areas in which we work. Working on a tailored outcomes, and here's the invitation to the community, because it's the space that we start now exploring together, also with the farmers, with our suppliers, but with our customers, which tailored outcomes we want to take in each of the locations to enhance this knowledge, also this link that Joe was talking about before. Next slide.
Mhm.
For that, to make it more tangible, and when we go to this practice selection, we say, okay, this is what farmers do. We have 2 axes. One is the potential impact, and that depends on the context. What are the area that needs to be prioritized? Is it water? Is it soil health? Is it biodiversity? Everything. So we see what is the potential impact that these practices can deliver, also building on the work Joe has done with the SAI platform. And on the other axis is the ease of implementation. What is the cost of intervention? Is there knowledge available? Is an innovation available in the area? So we have there 5 different variables that allow us to compile and to go to this right corner, which are the practices we want to prioritize. And then we organize them in a stepwise approach, to see what is the foundation, and that we start building on that. And you can go to the next slide. To put it more in practice, our cocoa plant science team has highlighted these 2 practices for cocoa in Ghana, that you have an idea. In cocoa in Ghana, we are working with the smallholder farmers around 2 hectares, low yields between 300 kilograms to 600 kilograms per hectare. And the team has highlighted that pruning is really helping to improve yield up to 20%, and the reduction of pest incidents to up to 50%. So this is already helping us to reduce agrochemical needs and to reduce pressure on biodiversity. On the right side, we have pod spreading, and it looks very simple, but just having the cocoa pod husk after the harvest, spreading it around the trees, and also deciding which trees to promote, we call it the champion trees. It really helps to improve the yields, to improve nutrient cycle, to not lose this potassium that it will be lost otherwise, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for residue when it's not managed properly. And when we go to the next slide, just to give you another example of what we are doing in Brazil with coffee farmers. In Brazil, we know it's intensified production, large farms. Farmers tend to use a lot of fertilizer. And what we are working there is how we can improve nutrient management. How can we optimize this amount to reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to nitrogen? And with this, what we are seeing is this optimization is also helping us to reduce the cost for the farmers. So they are getting very, very excited as well of what can we do more. And we are also promoting cover crops between the coffee rows. They are wider since the machine needs to pass through. And this practice is helping us to reduce the bare soil, improve weed management, and also improve biodiversity in the farms. And the last slide, Bastian, please. Just to mention this cliche, there is not one size fits all, and we are also aware of that, as I assume everyone in this webinar, that farmers are very diverse, and we are embedding this concept in the way we design programs, in the way we approach the farmers. We are doing that through segmentation, in segmentation, we tend to cluster the farmers. We use that simple or accessible variables. What you are seeing in the screen is farm size and yield, and that give us different quadrants that gives an indication what is the possible trajectory that these farmers can have and what are possible limiting factors that we should tackle when designing interventions and incentives. This is not the only one we use. We also do use archetypes based on footprint, on carbon footprint, to identify hotspots and and make more effective our interventions. And with this, I finished the end. I reached the end of the presentation. Thank you, Bastian.
Thank you so much for that, Alejandra. Yeah, really, really great and encouraging to see yeah, the efforts that you at SAI have been undertaking to make sure that implementing regenerative agriculture on the ground is like also inclusive of farming communities and like really locally adapted and relevant to the production system contexts where you work. Yeah, we're like sort of nearing our last guest speaker. And now last but not least, we have Dom from Carlsberg with us today, who will be speaking about their engagement along the whole value chain to advance regenerative agriculture. Thank you so much, Dom, for rejoining us today. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you for the next few minutes. Handing over.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Bastian, and thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, within the next 5 minutes, I would like to make a point around contextualization of regenerative agriculture and the Regenerating Together framework. Doing so, and as my background on my camera suggests, I'm no longer pontificating that from my seat within SAI platform, but with Carlsberg Group. And yeah, so great to talk to you. And maybe first a bit of context around Carlsberg Group, what we're doing, and where regenerative agriculture comes in towards meeting our sustainability targets, or where it's positioned in our sustainability strategy. So first, again, coming to my background, most of you are aware that Carlsberg is a big brewery. So beer is a big business that we are doing, but it's not just beer, it's increasingly also soft drinks. We recently also acquired Britvic, a UK-based soft drinks company. So I'm going to talk about barley mostly today, but it's also other raw materials such as rice, sugar, and fruit juices that we procure and process, and that we want to shift towards, or where we want to shift our supply chains towards regenerative agriculture. A quick word on our global sustainability strategy that you see on this slide. It's branded Together Towards Zero and Beyond. And basically within that strategy, regenerative agriculture has a prominent role around driving progress towards our raw material sustainability goals. And the raw material sustainability goals are basically fall into two categories. You see them also on this slide. One is zero farming footprint. This is raw material coming from farms that implement regenerative agriculture practices. So we want to ramp that up. We want to be quite bullish about that and really have that as a key part of our supply chain. And the other component is zero carbon footprint, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, especially flag greenhouse gas emissions in our supply chain. And I think most of the audience that is involved with big corporate companies engaging in SBTi are aware of what these goals are and yeah, what the requirements are for that. So really regenerative agriculture, or the adoption of regenerative agriculture practices in our supply chain, are driving progress towards these two goals and our overall sustainability strategy. And that's not just for barley, that's again for all raw materials. We can go to the next slide, Bastian. I talked about the diverse raw materials, but let me hone in on barley. And because it is our biggest raw material, both in terms of the volumes we procure, but also in terms of the carbon footprint and the overall carbon emissions that we have at Carlsberg from raw materials. I think when we talk about barley, one thing that is important is to understand the value chain or the supply chain of barley, or what we actually procure, malted barley, so processed barley. And as you can see on this slide, there's quite a number of intermediary steps that a grain of barley takes until it's that green piece of goodness you see on the right-hand side of this slide. So until it's translated into beer that we then sell on to the customer. And so basically the value chain, as you can see here, it's farmers normally sell their grains to aggregators, cooperatives. They in turn then sell it to malting companies that process it, that malt the barley. What we then acquire as Carlsberg and bring into our breweries is malted barley, and that's then translated into beer or processed into beer. That structure of the supply chain in some ways limits our ability to directly engage with farmers because there's a couple of intermediary steps between. And it also underlines our need to be pragmatic, to be context specific, and also to align with our suppliers and other partners in the supply chain to agree on a shared definition of what good looks like, what does regenerative agriculture look like in a given context, and agree on the definitions and criteria. And I think that's where some attractiveness from the RTF comes from, because it gives us that flexibility to engage in these value chain collaborations to do that. The other thing to bear in mind is that compared to other raw materials like wheat, maize, or potatoes, barley is quite a niche crop in terms of farmer production volumes. So it's always a part of a rotation. And again, that requires collaboration around the rotation. We cannot impose our own rules for barley and then just assume that it's happening for the whole farm. It has to be aligned. So we need to make the Regen Ag concept work for the whole rotation. We need to make it work for the whole supply chain. Let me go to the next slide on that. And to give you an example, I take credit here for the great work that has been done by my colleagues before I joined Carlsberg. So I want to give kudos here to Jacob Anderson and Simon Hofmeier from Carlsberg for establishing one example of where we do such a context-specific supply chain collaboration. And this collaboration is what we do in Denmark. It's along the value chain. So we have a partner from the farmer side, which is DLG. We have a partner from the maltster side, which is Viking Malt. And with them, we work together on translating the RTF, the Regenerating Together framework, to the local reality. We also have a quite strong partnership in that with research partners, public sector research partners, in this case, Seges Innovation, who ensure that what we take is a science-based approach, and also protect us in some way against or highlight to us the importance of sustainability and avoiding greenwashing. So that's the case we have started this year. We are currently piloting this initiative on diverse farms in Denmark, but there's also an appetite to expand these value chain initiatives to other geographies and raw materials as we engage further in new crops and geographies from 2026 and beyond. So is this just the start of a journey? Not just probably, of course, and we want to do more about that moving forward. What you also see on this slide as a side note is that we launched our first regenerative beer this year, a couple of weeks ago, in the Danish market. That's basically all I wanted to say. And looking out of the window, where I was quite happy to see that Julia has nice weather, because we are in the middle of quite a titillating thunderstorm here, and I consider myself lucky that the connectivity stayed. But yeah, with all that, back to you, Bastian and Julia, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dom, for rounding off our narrative here around engaging varied stakeholders in this common regenerative agriculture journey that we're all on. Really motivating to see how Carlsberg are bringing together also so many different actors in driving the implementation of Regen Ag on the ground. And now looking at the time, we're almost at a point where we'll need to come to a close, but not before thanking you, whoever, like all of you who are in the audience, thanking all of you for and reiterating the proactive engagement required from us all in jointly driving the implementation of regenerative agriculture. As always, we're also very keen on continuing the conversation with you beyond this webinar, of course, either through applied research, like the collaboration with NIAB on linking regenerative agriculture outcomes and practices that we've heard about from Joe, or on the quantification of regenerative agriculture outcomes through pilot initiatives led by you and partners implementing the Regenerating Together framework, through adaptations of the Regenerating Together framework to varied production system contexts, or on the development of case studies and knowledge products around regenerative agriculture. And of course, as well as on technical and financial support needed in driving regenerative agriculture at scale. And with that, we come to a close, and I'd like to thank you very, very much, everyone, for dialing in today for this webinar. And a very special thank you, of course, to our fantastic guest speakers in the room here, to Pascal, Joe, Alejandra, and to Dom. It's been really great having you and hearing from you and your work firsthand. So yeah, with that, we're wishing you all a lovely rest of your day and afternoon or morning, wherever you are. And we look forward to reconnecting with you soon. Thank you, and take care. Bye-bye.